Welcome to Module 7 presentation, a little about research and citation shortcuts. We're talking about these particular shortcuts right now because we're moving to the end of the class. We've been talking about argumentative papers and also thinking about research papers and citations and things like that. And so I wanted to just talk for a little bit about research and citation shortcuts that a lot of students use and how those can sometimes be problematic. But first we should begin by talking about why do students take shortcuts. Sometimes I think as teachers we're tempted to believe that students take shortcuts just because of laziness, or sometimes I think there's an implication that you're just a bad person if you take some kind of research shortcut, and that's by no means true. Most of the time when students take shortcuts, that's not the reason. It's not laziness, and it's not just being devious or trying to get away with something. But there are several reasons. The first one is just that college level writing is difficult. By definition, it's more difficult than high school writing, and sometimes students feel overwhelmed and want extra help. Writing stresses out lots of students. Writing is not an easy process, and particularly if students haven't been given adequate support and writing instruction in high school, it can be very stressful to write papers, and this can also lead students to take shortcuts. Many students are not confident of succeeding on their own. That's another reason, partially because of stress, like I said, but also just because if they always had help in high school, doing it alone can be intimidating. Also, and this is very common, sometimes students have been taught in high school to use these very shortcuts as helps. And so it's difficult to not default back to that if that's what you've been taught to do. These are all different reasons why students sometimes take shortcuts. So 3 different shortcuts to avoid. And just a quick summary, these are content shortcuts, Wikipedia, and citation generators. These are 3 different types of shortcuts we're going to discuss. First are content shortcuts, and this encapsulates a couple of different areas. So content shortcuts often occur when students don't know what to write about, either can't get an idea, or students have a topic but they can't meet minimum length requirements. And so they'll turn to a shortcut to obtain content for a paper. And these shortcuts are several. The first one is essay services. Essay services are when you're literally purchasing an essay from an online service to pass off as your own. And there are services that do this. Another way that this happens sometimes is students will pay a friend for an essay that friend wrote for the same class a couple of years ago or something. There are several problems with this option. First, it's blatant plagiarism. And if you get caught doing it, you will face serious consequences. But that's not the only negative consequence that can result. A second one is that essays for sale often are not of the best quality. There's no guarantee that a bought essay will get you a good grade. It's not as if it's worth more or it's better just because you had to pay money for it. That's not necessarily true. And also, a third problem is that usually a bought essay will sound very different from your normal writing voice, and so it might be easily detectable to your teacher. An essay bought from a personal friend might not trip a plagiarism detector, but if it sounds completely different than how you normally write, your teacher is going to realize that you did not write that essay. So these are all problems with essay services, aside from the ethical problem of that it's basically stealing to, not stealing the essay, but it's stealing as in you're passing off someone else's ideas as your own idea. So that's kind of the most blatant content shortcut. Another one is plagiarism that's not a completely different person's essay, but that's integrated with your own words. This is when students take text from outside sources and include it in essays without giving proper credit. This is what we traditionally think of when we think of as plagiarism. And that also makes it appear as if the words are the student's own ideas. This type of plagiarism is easily detected by plagiarism software like Turnitin or SafeAssign, both of which we use at HBU. This is one reason not to do this, because the plagiarism software will tell us which words are yours and which words are not, and where you're getting them from. And some students think that they can fool the plagiarism software by changing every third word of a short source text, which sometimes that will fool the plagiarism software. Sometimes it still doesn't work. But even if it fools the plagiarism software, generally teachers can tell, because doing that usually results in super awkward and confusing sentences that are themselves a dead giveaway that that's what you've done. Because often in a situation like that where students have taken a plagiarized piece of text and then just changed random words to kind of similar words, it sounds like a robot. To go back to one of the previous presentations, it doesn't sound like a real person. And sometimes those sentences even sound nonsensical. They don't even work as sentences. And that's a really clear giveaway that a person is trying to change a text rather than writing original text. And this kind of plagiarism, by the way, also carries heavy penalties. And another thing to remember about this type of plagiarism, where you're taking someone else's text and putting it in your own essay, but without citations, is that you can even do this by accident. Anytime you put someone else's words in your paper and don't properly cite that, that's considered plagiarism, whether you did it on purpose or not. This is a great reason to always go back before you turn in a final copy and make absolutely sure that anything in your paper from another source has a citation. Because even if it's just from sheer forgetfulness, you can still get in trouble for it. The last content shortcut I want to talk about is Sparknotes, the student's best friend, or at least that's how a lot of students think of it. Often students will turn to Sparknotes because they feel insecure writing about literature. Sparknotes make a big appearance in English 1323 because in that class you'll be writing about literature, or sometimes Great Works 1, classes like that. And students will feel insecure writing about literature and so might turn to Sparknotes or similar websites. There's lots of different ones like these to tell students what the text is, quote, about. You know, if you read something and think, I have no idea what is the point of this, a lot of times students will turn to Sparknotes. And Sparknotes can give some ideas about a piece of literature. That's true. But usually those ideas, often about things like symbolism, are ideas that you could come to on your own if you actually read the text and thought about it. So often students will read Sparknotes instead of reading the text, which is a problem because when you're writing a paper about a text you're supposed to have read and instead you've just read the Sparknotes, usually that's evident to the teacher. And if you actually read the piece of literature, often you could come to some of those same ideas on your own. It's also important to remember that those ideas in Sparknotes are fairly simplistic, and that so many students get their ideas from Sparknotes that if you do the same and then include those ideas in your paper is not going to stand out in any way from the crowd. It's going to sound exactly like everything else that is online or that anybody else has written. So that the bottom line with all of this is that, yeah, Sparknotes might help you to get a C on a paper, but it will never help you get an A. To get an A on a paper about literature, you need to do work that's distinctive enough that you actually stand out. You need to have ideas that are original, or at the very least are expressed in a way that's original. And if you're just parroting what you read off of Sparknotes about the themes and symbolism of your literary text, that's not ever going to be a high quality A paper. So just keep that in mind about Sparknotes. Another shortcut people turn to a lot is Wikipedia. Lots of students just go straight to Wikipedia for any research paper because the site is easy to use and has tons of information. And Wikipedia is really useful. On a day-to-day basis, just anytime one needs to look up a word that's new or a concept that is brand new, Wikipedia can be really helpful for just everyday research. But the problem with Wikipedia for research papers for school is that Wikipedia is user-generated and it's anonymous. So you, the writer, have no idea if the person who wrote the article is a credible source or not. It could be a professor in that topic, or it could be, a freshman high school student. And there's no way for you to know. Therefore, you should never cite Wikipedia for an essay, like in the works cited page or something like that. It's not a credible source. However, Wikipedia can be a good way or a good tool to find identifiable and trustworthy sources. And the way you do this is by using sources cited at the bottom of Wikipedia articles. So that if you're going to write a paper about, Moby Dick or something like that, and you don't want to cite Wikipedia because you don't know who wrote it, it's not a credible source. Any good Wikipedia article that's been effectively put together that doesn't have any caution flags in it or anything will have listed at the bottom the specific sources where the facts in the article came from. So go to the bottom of the Wikipedia page, go to the sources, and if the sources used by the person who wrote the article look credible, follow the links to those sources and cite those sources. That's totally fine. So that if you are reading a Wikipedia article and that, through its own source list, leads you to another article, it's absolutely acceptable to use that other article. And in that case, you're using a Wikipedia article more like a database in the sense that it's a way of introducing you to sources rather than using the Wikipedia article as a source itself in your paper. One last shortcut that students use a lot is citation generators. And many students do this because they fear screwing up citations. Sometimes it's because of laziness. And so students will turn to citation generator websites or tools, things like EasyBib or things like that. These are a terrible idea for several reasons. And the first is that citation generator cannot be trusted because it's a machine. And that's not to say that machines are inherently malignant or anything like that. But because the citation generator is a machine, that means it has no flexibility and it has no ability to understand what you're trying to do or what you're trying to say. So the citation generators will only work if you put every single piece of information for each citation into the exact right slot in the machine. And if you can do that, you're perfectly capable of just writing your own citations. Because that's what the citation formulas in your book or on the Purdue OWL website, for example, that's what the citation formulas do, is they show you where to put each thing. So if you have the citation formula in front of you and you have the source, you should be able to write the citation yourself just as easily as plugging everything into a citation generator. If you don't put in all the right information to the citation generator in the right places, the citation generator is going to fill up any blank spots with abbreviations like ND, which means no date. And abbreviations like that are not used in regular MLA style, which is what we use in English classes. So the presence of abbreviations like that in your works cited page will make it clear to your teacher that you did use a citation generator. So this is another shortcut that it is very clear when you are taking that shortcut and it doesn't look good. Because even if you turn to the citation generator out of fear and wanting to do a good job, to the teacher it could still just look like laziness. So bottom line for all of that is don't trust the citation generator because it's just a machine. And you know, better to trust your own mind, use the citation formulas, and put in the work to do your own citations. And once you get the hang of writing your own citations, it actually does become quite easy to do as long as you have the proper guides. So to conclude everything we've talked about in this session, do your own work. It might not be perfect, but it's yours. It's your work. So avoid these shortcuts and do your own work. It's always going to come out better in the long run to do your own work if you make a sincere effort. And that's the key, is rather than taking shortcuts to achieve a mediocre effect, if you can do your own work and make a sincere effort, often the effect and the grade is much better than if you tried to take shortcuts. And you can do it. And if you feel like you can't do it, it's always fine to get help from your professor or from a tutor if you are struggling in one of these areas. If you're struggling with what to write about, or if you're struggling with how to find good sources, or if you're struggling with how to write citations, all of those are things that you can seek help from a real person and get the help you need without having to turn to these kind of digital shortcuts. So hopefully this session has given you some idea of reasons to avoid these shortcuts, but also some things you can do instead to produce much better and more original work.